Ba-dum, ba-ba-dum, bum-bum, ba-dum, bum-bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Well, hello, whoever, wherever, whenever you are. Denise Matteau here. Welcome. Glad you showed up. Hope a few people show up. I just had to delete something, and I need to hear from chatters if my audio has been corrected. Um, I'm gonna assume it's okay. Let me check. Let's see here. It's going to have to be very quick because I don't want to create a feedback loop. Okay, can I hear? Okay, can I hear? All right, audio's fine. Still nobody back here. It's funny, a minute ago, hello whoever you are, thank you for jumping on. A few minutes ago when I was deleting the false start, because once again, this is the second time this happens. I start up a live stream, there's no audio. I back out of it, come back in, and I have audio. Whatever. But I had 22 watching, which is like, wow, that's within just a minute or two of opening up. Hello, John V. And as I looked at it, it dropped in 1 second. It dropped from 22 to 12. I thought, wow, there's something very glitchy going on. And I'm concerned that we might actually be entering a kind of anarchy of algorithms and AIs, because there's some stuff happening with these lawsuits between Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Oh, hello, Kaluna. Thank you. Telling me I've got a new subscriber because of my heart. An Indian. I was just looking at something about the Bhagavad Gita and quantum physics that was very interesting. We'll have to talk about that sometime. But anyway, back to this Manchurian candidate. Now, if you're from other countries, you might not know what that means. It's an American expression that comes from a 1960-something or other movie back during the Cold War with Russia. There was this idea that Russia had experimented with and was successfully creating Manchurian candidates. And actually, I think it also related to China. That's Manchuria, I think, is part of China. But the idea is you take a normal person and you break their personality down and you insert certain trigger words or symbols and you train that person to kill on command only when that word or is spoken or the symbol is seen. Then the Manchurian candidate will operate as such, will do the murder, an assassination most likely, and then have total amnesia about it. Not be able to tell who they were working for or anything. Spy novel stuff. And the Manchurian Candidate was the title of that movie. Well, Americans, we take our popular cultural concepts from movies all the time. And so when we talk about a Manchurian candidate, we're talking about any system in which somebody is trained to kill on command. not to kill because of loyalty to a nation or a tribe or a moral issue of punishment. You know, none of these things figure in. It's like the person is like a machine. And there is there's a lot of evidence, in fact, that the United States was actually doing this. And of course, it's typical of propaganda that you describe what your own country is doing that's evil, but you claim that it's the other guy who's doing it. I mean, that's not just with politics. That happens with human beings, just in personal relationships. Frequently, the person who cries victim is responsible for victimizing others. I mean, you just don't know. So anyway, it's still, a lot of people still think that, well, that's a fairy tale, it's fiction. But there is evidence that we had this MK Ultra training program that was run by the American intelligence CIA, and there have been different military attempts to train people that were attempts to create Manchurian candidates. And now we've been seeing this rash for years now. I mean, I'm looking at 10 years of what I'm talking about, of school killings, you know, mass shootings, church shootings. It's not limited to the United States, but I'm talking about what's been going on in this country. And quite often, the shooter is a young person who's been exposed to the same material over and over again in social media, and frequently an isolated young person. Or even two, like the Columbine killers was a pair of young boys. But they were pretty much their own, isolated into their own thing and worked together. Anyway, okay, that's all the sociology of it. A lot of this stuff is related to cult formation. Cult formation has been developed to a science by all of the major countries, you know, the powers, developed countries. The Communist Party did a lot of it. I'm getting a lot of people with names that look like they're from India. Must be the time zone. Welcome, anyway. And I'm in Texas, by the way. The United States was at the top of this. And I'm not going to look too much at the chat. It's distracting. I'll look at it once in a while, okay? So don't feel like I'm ignoring you. So what's been going on in YouTube? Okay, we've got Terry Joyce. Terry Joyce is somebody who specializes in glorifying and promoting these people who claim to be Manchurian candidates. They call it super soldier. They're just about all charlatans. I mean, I would say all of them. Actors. They get they're young men. Some of them are women, but the ones that I'm thinking of are all men. Men like Max Spears, for example, is one of the people who got killed or died suspiciously. That's being his legacy is now being manipulated by Terry Joyce. She has a shrine to him, according to some people. I mean, she promotes these people while claiming she's exposing what's been going on. But she promotes the Manchurian candidate personality. They call them super soldiers. Max Spears was an actor, and his own mother publicly stated that he was never in the military. And this was, I think, in an interview with a conversation with Terry Joyce. in which the mother explains that they grew up in a town near a military base, and her son Max was interested in acting, and he always wanted to be like a John Wayne type of actor. He wanted to play war roles, and he wanted to play military hero roles. He didn't want to go into the military, and he never did, but he wanted to play the role of a hero in the movies. So he hung out with people from the base. He learned military style and behavior. And then he started marketing himself in a kind of real reality TV style of pretending to be the super soldier. So he played the role that he wanted to play in the movies, but instead he basically started making his own money by playing that role on stage in front of audiences and telling them it wasn't a role, telling them it was real. And Terry Joyce is a Hollywood, well, she's a variety of things. She's been a performer herself. She's also called herself a journalist. And she's also been involved in being a casting agent and production, different levels of production work in the media in Hollywood. And she latches on to people like that. So at this point, there's no dots to connect. It's just a guy who's thought of a clever way to fulfill his fantasies and make money, make a career for himself. Another opportunist who comes along who says, oh, okay, I'll play the role of the interviewer and, really help get this charlatan crew on the road and pretend that you're real by interviewing you. He died basically at the hands of some of Terry Joyce's colleagues who were also interviewing him. They had a Manchurian candidate-oriented, super soldier-oriented series also, just like Terry Joyce. And they were promoting a number of these guys, including him. Their thing was called Bases. There were two names for it. One was Bases, the other was Project Camelot. And he was being interviewed. They brought him to Poland for some reason. He went to Poland to be interviewed by these two British media people. And he died there, deathly ill in his hotel, with actually another colleague of Terry Joyce, is this woman, Sarah Rachel Adams, who was his girlfriend and was there with him when he died. They didn't call the hospital. He became, the symptoms that are described appeared, it may have been a natural death in which they simply allowed it to happen, because the symptoms, I'm not a doctor or anything, but I did look up what they described what he was going through, and what somebody said he had a perforated ulcer. And there is a kind of dark fluid that you can cough up if you have that, and it is fatal. A perforated ulcer is fatal. I had an uncle who died of that. So he had those symptoms, but here's the thing. Because he was working so closely with all of these people, Terry Joyce and these others, they all knew his symptoms. They all knew he had the problem. He also had drug abuse problems. Sarah Rachel Adams, who is working with Terry Joyce, even as I speak right now, she's part of this Manchurian candidate super soldier gang. She's another one that promoted all this stuff. She actually tried to do rituals with him while he was dying. She was responsible for, and I think she was arrested, but somehow she's responsible for the near death of the daughter and son-in-law or maybe it was a son and daughter-in-law, but the children of Steve Harvey, the famous television game show host. Family Feud, I think, is his show that he hosts. And his child and the married couple, of which one of them was his child, had hired Sarah Rachel Adams to do shaman work with them. And they all nearly, including Sarah, nearly died from poisoning themselves with the mushroom mixture she gave them. And you say, okay, these people are all just crazy, dangerous, reckless wackos. But the common thread through it is this New Age cult that I have talked about, the cult that's based in Massachusetts. And Thomas Schoenberger has been involved. Started out by mentioning Nathan Stoltman, and forgive me if I'm a little bit confused here, because unfortunately I had to delete my first start because I didn't have audio. So I might have mentioned Nathan there, and now it's the first time I'm mentioning it. Nathan Stoltman is part of the YouTube social media group that Terry Joyce and these others are part of. Terry Joyce was, in fact, interviewed by Nathan Stoltman at one point. Thomas Schoenberger is also involved in, or was, he did run a booking company to book engagements. He said mostly for rock bands, but also acting and so. In fact, he booked another personality in this parade who died suspiciously, Isaac Cappy. He booked him an interview with Nathan Stoltman. Nathan Stoltman was acting as the platform for this cult. If you were going to be presented as a real personality, you would be kind of discovered by somebody in this cult and then kind of moved over to Nathan Stoltman to be interviewed, and that would be your opening. And then, of course, other people would pick up on it, and your career would be off and running. It's heavily involved with ritual, not just the stuff that Sarah Rachel Adams did, but and a lot of what Terry Joyce does is pure ritual. She likes to pretend to be a Christian, and, really it makes your skin crawl what she does to that heritage. But all the way through it, these people believe in what they're doing. I mean, some of them only believe that it's a good career and it's going to guarantee them wealth and power, so they believe in it the way a gambler believes in his lucky rabbit's foot. But then there are others who are very deeply involved in all of the deeper mental exercises. And it's all very New Age. It's heavily involved with death. They actually do seek out mentally ill people who appear to be at risk of either killing themselves or angering somebody else enough to be killed. And what these people do is they hover around them, they push and push and push until they get the result, and that gives them, they get their personal thrill out of it, but also it builds the public career. And they focus, you can sort of see how they're working together when you notice how they focus on one person, and even though they may be fighting with each other, they maintain a careful focus on certain targets. Dave Schroeder is a Manchurian candidate target that you can see how they're working together, because you can see Thomas Schoenberger manipulating him alongside Terry Joyce continuously triggering and manipulating him. And the one thing about David Schroeder, his YouTube channel is under his own name, David, and Shurter. He's written a book that claims that he grew up in a satanic family. His stepfather was arrested, and he wrote a true confession book about what it was to grow up in that family. He also has focused on the Manchurian Candidate Training Center. There is one. It claims to be a place for people who have suffered satanic abuse to go for healing. But it gathers people together who have this super soldier fantasy, and they feed off each other. That's how David Shurter got involved. They published his book. They had him as a featured speaker at some of their conferences. That group was founded by a man named Neil Brick. His headquarters in Chicopee, Massachusetts. I don't know if it's still there, but it was there for many years. The organization is called SMART. SMART. I'm not sure of how the title. I always pull a blockage on it. Neil Brick was directly involved, alongside his big boss, Steve Hassan in Boston, the famous anti-cult expert. They really have been running this for years. Steve Hassan goes back to the 1970s. Neil Brick, I believe he founded his group in the early 80s. Okay. And it is a cult. People become immersed in their new identity as Manchurian candidates. They claim that they are exposing it by speaking about it, but what they're doing is they're living the fantasy and reinforcing the fantasy. And the ones who are publicly acting out the fantasy in that way are not likely to actually go out and shoot anybody. But this is where Nathan Stolpman comes in. Nathan Stolpman, like David Shurter, has publicly spoken about his struggle with schizophrenia. He's publicly spoken about the medications, and he has occasionally stopped taking his medications. And, you know, those who've watched his channel over the years have seen him have several psychotic breaks. But it was his last psychotic break that it hit me, wait a minute. He was setting up a mass shooting at a Seventh-day Adventist church. This is what happened. He had already gotten himself kicked out of his family. You know, he's gone. I think he was actually homeless at the time. He started doing these street videos where he was just streaming as he walked along, talking. And over the course of about a week, you could see him deteriorate. During his monologues, he was talking a lot about this Seventh-day Adventist church, and then he started addressing children as if he thought his audience should include children. He started addressing them and telling them how they needed to come and save him. He started saying that this Seventh-day Adventist church there was something about he had been using a phone in their lobby, a payphone or something, and they weren't allowing him to hang out. I guess he was trying to sleep there or something while he was homeless, and they weren't allowing him to continue. So he had a grudge on him, and he started talking about this, and he started trying to cultivate a rescue response from what he imagined to be an audience of children. I didn't really think too much of what he was saying beyond noticing that he was having another psychotic break until I decided to look at something else. And as I often do in YouTube, I tried to reduce the screen down into the corner so I could look at something else. And what popped up was the little notice that you can't do that because this is identified as for children. Now, that never happened with any other Stoltman shows. He doesn't usually designate his audience, his videos for children. But that one, where he was appealing to children to come and do something, to get in touch with him, was set up so that it would appear in children's programming in YouTube. That I found that very disturbing, and then I went back and listened again more closely and realized he was targeting that church, wherever it was somewhere in the town where he was walking around. So I contacted the authorities, I gave them the link, and I said, I'm a little concerned. Now, my concern at that point was limited to the idea that Nathan Stoltman was possibly trying to recruit kids to do something. And he obviously needed some help anyway. And what they did get him help. They picked him up, spoke to him. He got some psychiatric care for a while. And the next time he showed up in YouTube, he was out. He said he had been in the hospital, and apparently he was able to get some housing because he had a place to stay. So that was good. But I was still thinking it was just him having a crisis. And Thomas Schoenberger was not involved in any of that. But he has been continuously involved in manipulating David Schroeder, who is also schizophrenic and easily manipulated, very paranoid. Stoltman was involved in the manipulation of David Schroeder because this group had convinced Nathan Stoltman that Thomas Schoenberger was camping out in his head and was responsible for anything bad he might do. And I didn't think Schoenberger had anything to do with that, because this group targets Schoenberger for hatred. They want Schoenberger to do something to himself. They don't care who it is. It's what they do. It's how it's that's what their group is based on. And if they can get one of their own to do something, they're even, it's a satanic group. But Schoenberger, he's popped up more than once where he's been cooperating with this stuff. I don't think he's 100% responsible, but I don't care, because as a group, they're all responsible. They work together. They've been working together now for 10 years, because we're looking from 2017 to now we're almost up to 2027. And the same people. Terry Joyce was there in the very beginning. I didn't run into her until about 2020, but she was interviewed with Nathan Stoltman way before that. She was involved with setting up a lot of this. They focused heavily on trying to get me involved with claiming that the Sutherland Springs church shooting was fake. They were involved with Alex Jones's crap about harassing the parents of people who've been killed in these shootings, particularly in his case, the shootings up in that Connecticut school, Sandy Hook. He was sued by at least one of the family, I think several of the families, sued him for the horrible attacks they suffered from his cult. And this group is part of that cult. Heavily entangled with this Massachusetts setup with Steve Hassan running the stalker rings that are protected by law enforcement, because law enforcement, for the past 20 years at least, has been persuaded that these are legitimate anti-cult activists that are working with Steve Hassan. But they're a stalker hit mob, and they work also with Neil Brick. Neil Brick and Steve Hassan work very closely together because Neil Brick gathers these people to these conferences, which fools the public into thinking that, well, they're all a little weird, but they're right to be opposed to the satanic stuff because we know the satanic crimes are real. We know it's a problem in this country. So while you might not want to really get involved with satanic panic, you still don't want to do anything to the guy who is willing to address it. And that's what Neil Brick pretended to be. But Neil Brick, in fact, has set up a recruitment space in which people can be brought into real isolated cult, enclosure. And as this has been going on, as I say, Steve, a lot of this dates back to the 70s. It dates back to the MK Ultra program because when MK Ultra was defunded, first the CIA moved a lot of their stuff up into Canada because they knew they couldn't get away with it on American soil. So McGill University up in Montreal was a space where they did serious experimentation. They're now being sued by adult survivors of that. After they were defunded in the mid-1970s, after Congress had some hearings looking into it, the work still went on. It's just that they went private. They got funding somewhere else. A lot of it came from Israeli Mossad. Now there's a big thing going on about allegedly Israeli military have been using dogs in the abuse of Palestinian prisoners. And a lot of people are saying that's the most outrageous, crazy thing you can accuse them of. But here in Texas, there are two incidences here in Texas. One has disappeared from the network, the internet. I couldn't find any of the news stories, but I remember about 3 years ago or 2 years ago, there was a case up near Dallas in which a sheriff was publicly defending the fact that his department had a couple of dogs euthanized because, as he explained, we could not try to rehabilitate these dogs because they had been trained to RAPE. Now, that news story did not say who the victims might have been. It was like, mention it and back away from it. It was just too crazy. And of course, it stuck in my mind. It's like, that's weird. And I never saw anything else about it. Then recently, there are these accusations against the Israeli military of doing the same thing to the Palestinians. So I went looking to see if I could find that old news story, and I couldn't, but I did find a story about an animal shelter that was accepting a couple of dogs who had been trained to do the same thing. And they were going to try to rehabilitate these dogs. They were not going to have them put down. And that is a news story. Wow. Have I lost the plot with Manchurian? No, I haven't. Because Israel stepped up when the American government defunded MK Ultra. Israel jumped in to fill the gap. Because these guys that were running, these doctors and psychiatrists and other evil types, I mean the evil side of those professions, they still needed to earn a salary. They still wanted to do that. They still had the facilities. They still had all their study work and everything. All they lost was Uncle Sam's paycheck. So Israel, it's my personal belief that Israel stepped up to the plate and basically continued to run it. And that's why Steve Hassan, a very prominent militant activist in the American Jewish community up in Boston, and his colleague Rick Allen Ross, a very prominent, active Jewish militant in Trenton, New Jersey, who was responsible for the massacre of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, back in 1993. Yeah, this is a very tightly coordinated system. And the smear campaigns are designed where they fear actually trying to physically silence all of their critics, because after a while people see what's going on. So they sort of psychologically silence us by trying, thinking that their smear campaigns totally discredit us in the eyes of the public. And they can be very successful for a while, but after a while the same thing happens, which is that the public notices the pattern. Over the years, you keep seeing the same people doing the same thing, working together with their play fights and the way they orchestrate their tag teams. And they have focused heavily on all of these school shootings and church shootings, and not all of them one by one, but the whole topic. They were heavily involved with the Las Vegas concert shooting back in, I don't know, that was 2016. Yeah, I think it was right after Trump was elected the first time. And what I was seeing was a pattern of extortion, where these groups, Terry Joyce is a perfect example, they focus on the families of people who die in terrible circumstances, suspiciously or in obvious crimes like the Las Vegas shootings. They focus on these people, and they pick away at them until they can find people they can exploit for publicity, they can build their careers. In some cases, they directly extort from them. Clovis Harmon was a big activist in this. You don't see her much anymore because she's been terribly ill. I think she may not even still be with us. Good riddance to her if she's gone. They heavily focus on silencing anyone who speaks up about this cult and its victims. And the cult heavily protects pedophile rings. The Hollywood media is, we have a pedophilic media culture in which children have been sexualized in American culture for years. And a lot of it actually goes right back to the same group that was doing MK Ultra, which is a psychiatric profession. A lot of the sexual revolution of the 60s and all that stuff. So it's no surprise. This is this is a group that I believe, if it could get fully investigated, it would be shown that this group, Gabe Hoffman, is a major funder openly on behalf of the American Jewish community, because he has openly tried to set up what he calls more aggressive anti-defamation, Jewish anti-defamation, they can do what they want to us, but no one dares speak up against them kind of thing. The Southern Poverty Law Center, another Jewish militant group, has just been noticed up in Massachusetts. They've been arresting people for Nazi type of activities and discovering that they were funded by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is part of this whole Manchurian candidate, where you get somebody else to go do something while you try to appear to be on the opposite side. and you manipulate that way. If you if you're following this, and mostly I'm speaking to people who are following it, um, you're going to say, wait a minute, these touch points of getting involved with mass shootings, trying to discredit any critics and discredit the victims so that the perpetrators, if they survive, because most of them get shot by the police in the middle of it all, but if they survive, they're supposed to walk free because they are assets of another nation state, Israel, in my opinion. And I suppose I have to admit they must be also assets of certain parts of the American government, because a lot of this dates back to the Clinton White House years. That's when a lot of this was set up, particularly the massacre of the Branch Davidians, which is part of this entire thing. This is a highly organized group. Thomas Schoenberger and Barry Powers, that attorney he's supposedly suing people up in Michigan, they have been manipulating this stuff. And I'm not going to jump on the smear train, the hate train of, go after this. Justice is going to happen. Okay? It is going to happen. Because this is a form of warfare that has a lot of families who've lost loved ones to these people. And when I say these people, I'm including the shooters, the nutcases that work for the Clintons and the Bidens and the Obamians, the monsters who have got Donald Trump I mean, that person that's in the White House now, he's not the Trump we elected. The Zionist thing, if you look into the actual ideology of Jewish Zionism and Christian Zionism with it, you see what it is. It's coming to a head, though, because even though right now we're on the brink of losing the internet, I've been seeing some things pop up from people whose video channels, some of them 20 years old, with thousands and thousands of viewers, have just disappeared to a hacker. And apparently this is a new wave of things that's happening right now, separately from the corrupt system in which YouTube has allowed groups like this Manchurian Candidate group to run troll campaigns to take down channels funded by people like Gabe Hoffman and the American Jewish community through its militants. I mean, I had a hard time. I was just trying to do a video with some material that somebody sent me. A guy that showed the open trafficking that Gabe Hoffman is engaged in. He was trying to force and pressure a Jewish woman who's trying to turn her back on the worst side of Jewish culture. An American Jewish woman who's saying, like, hey, don't talk to me about dating nice Jewish boys. I'm not interested. She's just trying to distance herself from that. Which, of course, is her right as a human being to take a good look at her heritage and say, I didn't choose this and I don't think I want it. And Gabe Hoffman there's a thing published in my thumbnail where Gabe Hoffman is openly trying to pressure her into being trafficked at a Jewish sex trafficking party. And she's refusing. Now that's adult, okay? That's adult trafficking, which is bad enough. But Gabe Hoffman is also heavily involved with the child trafficking that Terry Joyce is directly involved with. Jesse Davis, the people who, he calls himself Sewer King now, but most people refer to that group as Sewer Town. It's kind of like the nickname they earned. And they do have protection because every time they start getting to the point where people are beginning to put it all together, what happens is the powers that be, for want of a better term, I would say the CIA, the corrupt side of the FBI, which is 90% of it. I always leave room for that starry-eyed agent who really thought he was going to fight the good fight. And it's probably a rookie because they don't last much longer without getting corrupted. But they always make sure that something happens. In Rick Allen Ross's case, when he started to be exposed for his work as a terrorist, suddenly a guy who was in prison, a black guy, was told to start a career as Rick Ross, the rap artist, so that when you started Googling on Rick Ross to see what was being said about the Rick Ross Institute, which was a cult discussion board in which the people who were responsible for my daughter's death were actively they were referring to my daughter as collateral damage in those discussions. Rick Ross took those out, he cleaned it up, and then he renamed it Cult Education Institute. And all of a sudden, this guy who was in jail in Florida comes out of jail and bursts on the scene as a big black gangster rap artist named Rick Ross. Thomas Schoenberger's handler is a Jewish man named Mark Levine, who has sort of maintained around Thomas's circle. He's maintained this image of a music producer who's, plays the violin, and Thomas is a classical, Thomas's compositions, music are in the neoclassic genre. So people who know Thomas Schoenberger's music and know about Mark Levine, and also Thomas's other handler is a woman named Marcia Stockton. She's very big involved in this stuff too. And she's definitely his handler alongside. I mean, he can't escape from this stuff because he's got a lifelong career under contract to Mark Levine, or Marcus Levine. And Marcus Levine, though, he's a hip-hop music producer in the black community. He's not black, he's a white Jew. He was written up in the Israeli Jewish newspaper as an example of the wonderful American Jewish community. So he's right in there with the Jewish militants, we're the chosen people and the rest of you are cattle attitude. And he's in the position to have been part of getting that black ex-con out to have himself a brand new career as Rick Ross, the rap star. And Rick Ross, the rap star, I'm not saying he's responsible for anything. He's just some black guy who's, maybe just as he's coming up to the end of doing his time for whatever he was in there for, who knows? It's probably something petty for all I know. But they look around, they find who has the personality they're looking for. And they approach him and say, hey, you have a future as a rap star. Let us help you. Right? That's how they approach. That's why Thomas Schoenberger was important to them for years. As a booking agent, he was someone who knew how to network, and he's a smooth talker, very smooth talker. And I don't mean that in a bad way. His personality is very pleasant to listen to. So he became a very valuable asset to the recruitment level of finding young musicians. Now, this is another thing. There may well be something neurological about the way music is used, because the military has always used music. It has used drums. And everyone knows how you feel when you listen to military music compared to if you're listening to a romantic love song. No matter what your emotional personality is, your physiology changes. You can't march to a love song. But you can't sit still to a powerfully performed martial song, music piece. And in the course of cult recruitment, finding individuals who have a special tendency to be affected by music is something Thomas Schoenberger was naturally good at. He didn't have to know what he was doing. He was involved with mentoring a guy who, his name escapes me, but he shot a deputy. There was a sheriff and there were two sheriff's deputies who were serving a warrant on this guy. He had been involved in some kind of fisticuffs in his town in Arkansas. Thomas Schoenberger was good friends with a man named Bobby Sarwalt, who's a member of the Jesse Davis crew, or was for many years, who did 6 years for home invasion. He did 6 years in prison, hard time, for a home invasion crime that he committed when he was young. He was about 19 or so. Sam Fullerton. Okay, Jolly Bridge Burner. Hey, there's a blast from the past. How are you doing? Haven't seen you in a few years. But anyway, when you put it all together, you realize you are looking at the Mossadian, American Mossad. Let's call it that. That's what it is. The American Zionist MK Ultra cult that is based in Massachusetts, heavily runs through Massachusetts, MIT, Harvard, all of the academic, intellectual intelligentsia connections are there in Boston. Also out on the West Coast, Stanford. And Thomas Schoenberger's father was involved with the Stanford faculty, and he was a psychiatrist. His brother is also involved in medicine. I think his brother might even be a neurologist. I'm not sure. Say hi to your good are you good buddies with Lee still? I don't know. It's been years. Anything's possible. But if you're talking to him, say hi to him. And that'll probably scare him. Now, this lady I just greeted, Jolly Bridgeburner, she and somebody that she used to co-host with, and they used to do streams together all the time. It's a guy named Lee Veltman. And they know all about the Nathan Stoltman, the circle I'm talking about, because they were in it too. And Lee Veltman was trying to get people to look at the residential school system and its torture, the psychological torture groups. That's where they do a lot of the Manchurian candidate training. They get young people with problems from wealthy families, because they're the only ones that can pay the tuition to put their kids in these boarding schools in order to keep them out of jail for some stupid drug offense. And they think, the families think, well, we'll put them there, send them off to the Maine woods or someplace like that. You know, they won't embarrass us with high society, and they'll come out without a police record and all cleaned up. And they're subjected to torture. to psychological torture. Stuff that Lee Veltman and some of the other people who've been through those schools describe comes right out of a Chinese communist or Soviet Union, um, rehabilitation, communist indoctrination. That's the word. They're indoctrination camps. It's the same stuff. Neil Brick was working with the woman who was directly involved with the death of a state police captain who was starting to look into the schools. My niece was a psychologist in one of those schools, and my niece, Lori Zeif, Zeif. She spells her first name Loree. You look that up, Lori Zeif, Vermont mental health. You will find news stories of her in her career as an authority rising in Vermont government. Bobby Gagne was another member of the I don't want to look at the chat. I'll be distracted again. So you guys behave yourselves in chat, and I'll check again later. Bobby Gagne is a woman who was directly involved with Neil Brick. She was another one who wrote a true confession book. Hers was about satanic ritual and claiming that she has multiple personality disorder as a result of MKUltra training. That's part of what Neil Brick runs on, lionizing these people. She became close friends with that state police captain, and I believe had something to do with his death. He was found unconscious, alone at the bottom of his cellar stairs, never regained consciousness. He died a few days later. And it was considered that he was not well. He had a blood disorder. But I know because I knew Captain White, Thomas White, and I was questioned by one of the troopers who was, they never did a real investigation, but some of his friends, one of whom was a very close friend of mine, who was also a state trooper, did say that they were wondering if he had been injected with something because he had tattoos. And they were talking amongst themselves and asking everybody if they noticed anything about the tattoos so that they could track where he had gotten the tattoos, because he did have a blood disorder and he was pulling back from so much active duty. He was still on duty when he died, but he was pulling back because of illness due to this chronic blood disorder. And that's what was blamed for his death. But those of us who were close to him don't believe it at all. Bobby Gagne was there that week, and he was challenging what Neil Brick was doing. He was he was friendly to Neil Brick because he thought the satanic panic stuff that they were promoting, the ideas, he was trying to get those same crimes looked at, because as a state police captain, he was seeing those crime scenes. And he was trying to get people to stop being involved with satanic panic sensationalism and start using proper forensics. But when he pushed that too hard, that endangered the psychological operation that the American Jewish community, the Zionist terrorist community, was promoting. And so something happened. She was there. She was there. And anyone who thinks, if you're the Massachusetts State Police, you look into it. Look into Captain White. He was one of the very first crime scene analysts, where you had that specialty in animal control. They didn't have crime scene analysts to the degree that they have it now back then. He was one of the pioneers in that field, and he was specifically interested in animal torture cases because they were finding cases in Boston. They were finding cases in Boston where the gangs coming up from South America. At that time, it was the Colombian cartel that's associated with the Clinton cartel. Um, they were using animal torture in their recruitment and indoctrination of their younger members. And Captain White was seeing those crime scenes. And I think he was the first one who was where they raised animal torture up to the level of a true crime and not just, something embarrassing. Let me go into the chat because I'm beginning to ramble and I need to get some sleep, but I want to check the chat first. Okay, I got a lot of people from India in here. Then there's John Q. Public telling me I'm intelligent. Right, okay. Have another drink, John. Jolly Bridgeburner, good to see you. Eric Palaki, enjoy in Christ. Thank you. And somebody from John Riggs Archery. Yet hardly anyone is talking about data centers coming in and eating towns and jobs like locusts. Well, the data center thing, we're going to get all into the other dimensions with that because they don't make economic sense. And the way towns, definitely it's a psychological operation that has caused us to be willing to allow them to get as far as they've gotten. People aren't applying a shred of logic to the resources they consume as well as the health risks they create. And nobody can speak of it because the media is basically hogtied and silenced. I mean, the only thing the media can talk about is political drama, personality drama. And it's left to obscure little people like me with our audiences of a dozen on a good day to speak about it. But you got to think about the story of the penny, okay? If I offer you a $100 bill in one hand and a penny in the other, but I tell you if you accept the penny instead of the $100 bill, you can come back every day for a month and I will double it. So it'll go from 1 penny to 2 pennies to 4 to 8 and so on. So how are you going to get the most money? To take that $100 bill or to take the doubling pennies? By the end of the month, you're a millionaire if you take the doubling pennies. So I am looking at my audience as doubling pennies. Thank you for showing up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Get the numbers up there. And share it out and tell people. If she rambles, put her on in the background while you do your knitting or something. Occasionally, she makes sense. Because if you talk enough, sooner or later, you will say something that makes sense. Right? Thank you all for being here. Denise Matteau, over and out.